Coming soon, The Assassination, an investigation into a true story that shook the world. A new podcast from the BBC World Service. Subscribe to The Assassination now, and you'll get every episode automatically.
This is the BBC. For details of our complete range of programmes, go to bbcworldservice.com/podcasts.
Welcome to the latest global news compiled in the early hours of the morning on Tuesday the 19th of December. I'm Jeanette Jalil with a selection of highlights from across BBC World Service News today. Coming up, in a speech setting out his national security policy, President Trump has said the United States faces a new era of competition, with rival powers such as China and Russia seeking to challenge its influence.
We face rogue regimes that threaten the United States and our allies. We face terrorist organizations, transnational criminal networks, and others who spread violence and evil around the globe.
Also in the podcast, a number of people have been killed after a train crashed off a bridge in the US state of Washington, smashing onto a busy motorway below.
At a certain point, it seemed like we were reaching sort of a bend in the tracks, and then the car careened down an embankment and came to a stop. After that happened, we could hear and feel the cars crumpling.
The South African Deputy President Cyril Ramaphosa has been elected leader of the governing ANC. He's vowed to fight corruption and revitalise a stuttering economy. And later, fans are left devastated after the hugely popular South Korean singer Kim Jong-hyun dies, with reports that he may have committed suicide. But first, President Trump has named China and Russia as competitors seeking to challenge America's influence, values and wealth. Presenting his new national security strategy, formed from his America First foreign policy vision, Mr. Trump said vigorous military, economic and political contests were now playing out all over the world.
We face rogue regimes that threaten the United States and our allies. We face terrorist organizations, transnational criminal networks, and others who spread violence and evil around the globe. We also face rival powers, Russia and China, that seek to challenge American influence, values, and wealth. We will attempt to build a great partnership with those and other countries, but in a manner that always protects our national interest.
Mr. Trump defended his own record on Iran and North Korea and urged Pakistan to take decisive action against terrorism. And he concluded by outlining his worldview.
We will pursue the vision we have carried around the world over this past year, a vision of strong, sovereign, and independent nations that respect their citizens and respect their neighbors. Nations that thrive in commerce and cooperation, rooted in their histories and branching out toward their destinies. That is the future we wish for this world, and that is the future we seek in America.
My colleague Julian Marshall spoke to our correspondent in Washington, Barbara Plett-Usher, and asked her how much of this so-called new national security strategy is actually new.
Well, I think there aren't really any surprises in it, actually. If you look at what President Trump has been saying in various speeches over the past year when it comes to foreign policy, it's all sort of encapsulated in this national security strategy, which is in essence America first, but not disregarding America's interests in the world. And what this definitely was not was a withdrawing from global leadership or a retreating from the U.S. international role, which is how his administration has sometimes been criticized. It was more really taking that American first agenda at home and wedding it to an international approach so that America is strong at home, economically secure. That is essential for American power and influence abroad, and also defining the national security strategy very much in economic terms. That's much more of an emphasis than previous national security strategies, especially in terms of trade. Defining it more in homeland security, that's also a new emphasis. But and also I would say probably more muscular than some of the other national security strategies. The overall theme was competition and how the U.S. was going to fight a competition and win it rather than cooperation. There was room for cooperation, but it was not the emphasis.
I understand, though, Barbara, that he was a lot softer on Russia than in a document outlining a national security strategy.
Actually, he didn't go into any detail really on either Russia or China, which are talked about in the National Security Strategy document, what they call revisionist powers, powers that are trying to revise the rules-based order in their favor and against U.S. interests. And he just in the speech mentioned that rival powers like Russia and China seek to challenge American influence. And then he went on. But everybody was watching in particular what he'd say about Russia because, of course, he's been much less critical of Russia than Congress has and many in his administration have, given the allegations of election tampering. So in the document, there were criticisms that Russia uses information operations and cyber efforts and so on as weapons or as ways to influence, and also that it tries to undermine the domestic political affairs of countries around the world, although the document itself does not specifically call out the U.S., which I think is kind of a glaring omission, given that the election tampering here is a big national security issue. But then President Trump himself went even further the other way. He talked about how he'd been having a chat with Putin this week and how President Putin had thanked him for their intelligence cooperation. That's the way it's supposed to work, he said. So yes, there are words in the document about Russia and the threat that it poses, but you did not get a sense of that from the speech.
Barbara Plett-Usher in Washington. Staying in the United States, a passenger train making its first trip on a new route has derailed on a bridge and plunged towards a busy motorway outside the city of Seattle. The crash, which left carriages dangling over the road, happened at the height of the morning rush hour. Several people were killed and dozens more were taken to hospital. This passenger, Chris Carnes, described the moment the Amtrak train came off the tracks.
At a certain point, it seemed like we were reaching sort of a bend in the tracks, and all of a sudden we were slammed into the seats in front of us, and then the car careened down an embankment and came to a stop. After that happened, we could hear and feel the cars crumpling and breaking apart, and water came out from the ceiling. There was a lot of dust all over the place, and in order to get out of the car, we had to kick out the emergency window because the emergency doors were not functioning. There were multiple people injured.
A spokesperson for Pierce County Sheriff's Department, Ed Troyer, spoke to reporters at the scene.
Right now we know that we have multiple fatals in the train, no fatals on the roadway. As you can see by the large response, we've extricated, the fire departments have many people and have taken them out of the train and they've been transported to hospitals. People that were able to walk are down under those tents being cared for by multiple groups. It's going to be a long time. There's damage to the bridge, there's damage to multiple vehicles down below, damage to the ground around it.
Just before we recorded the podcast, I got the latest from Jeff Pajola, a reporter for KOMO News Radio.
The search and rescue continues at this hour. We just got an update from the State Patrol in which they said that some of those cars that are dangling over the freeway are still too unstable to get into and see if there are any survivors or any deceased in there. As far as the investigation is going, there are two leading theories as to what may have caused this crash. As you mentioned, this was an inaugural run for a new route. This was a high-speed train that had been tested over and over again over the last several weeks. This was the first time it was carrying passengers. And this overpass over the busy interstate was curved. And there's speculation that the train may have been going too fast for that curve. We're also hearing from a U.S. government official saying there may have been some sort of obstruction on the track. Again, this is all very preliminary information. The investigation is ongoing. But what we do know is that at least 6 people are dead. Dozens and dozens more have been injured, many of them critically. A total of 84 people were on board this train, I should say, and many of them have been evacuated to local schools and local buildings to reconnect with family. But the freeway itself, as we approach the evening rush hour, is shut down. There are miles upon miles of backups. The investigation is ongoing and will last for several days.
Jeff Pajola, a reporter for KOMO News Radio. Now to South Africa.
Comrade Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma received 2261 votes. and Comrade Cyril Ramaphosa received 2440 votes. We declare Comrade Cyril Ramaphosa as the new president of the African National Congress.
Confirmation after an all-night vote and an equally long count that the Deputy President, Cyril Ramaphosa, had been elected leader of the governing party. He beat off a stiff challenge from a former wife of the current president, Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma. It's thought Mr Ramaphosa will take a tougher line over the corruption allegations hanging over the president, which he denies. Our Africa editor, Fergal Keane, considers what the results might mean for Jacob Zuma, for the ANC and for South Africa.
Cyril Ramaphosa becomes leader of the ANC at a time when South Africa is struggling on so many levels. The so-called Rainbow Nation of equality and racial harmony, envisaged in 1994, was always destined to be a mirage, given the historic legacy of inequality and division. But it would have been impossible, as a witness to the birth of that new nation, to imagine the moral quagmire into which South Africa has drifted in the age of Jacob Zuma. The allegations of corruption are relentless. Day after day, South Africans learn of new scandals involving the powerful and the well-connected. The divisions in the ANC, the party of Nobel Prize winners Nelson Mandela and Chief Albert Luthuli, have spilled into violence in parts of the country. The political instability has battered the economy. Youth unemployment, always a problem, now stands at more than 36%. The country's international credit rating has been reduced to junk status. At the same time, there are growing calls for radical economic transformation, code for dramatically reducing a commanding white influence in the economy. When he was helping to negotiate the end of apartheid, Cyril Ramaphosa displayed an uncommon mix of street cunning and strategic vision, and the capacity to persuade his enemies to come to a point of compromise they would previously have thought impossible. He will need those gifts and more to unite his divided party and potentially to lead his country.
Fergal Keane in South Africa. Parkinson's disease can leave people struggling to walk, speak and sleep. There's no cure and no definitive diagnostic test. But thanks to a woman in Scotland who can smell the disease long before it's even diagnosed, scientists may be close to a breakthrough. Elizabeth Quigley reports.
Joy Milne from Perth has a quite incredible sense of smell. She knew her husband Les had Parkinson's before he was diagnosed because his smell changed.
It was a new smell. I didn't know what it was. I had not met it anywhere else, so it wasn't in my memory. I kept on thinking, goodness, this smell. And I kept on saying to him, but you know, you're not showering. What's wrong? What are you doing? And he became quite upset about it. He really did. So I just had to be quiet.
But she only linked this to Parkinson's after they joined a support group, and she could smell it everywhere.
We sat down, we were having a cup of tea, and I said to him, those people smell the same as you. And he said, what? What are you talking about? I said, the people with Parkinson's in that room smelt the same as you.
Les died 2 years ago at the age of 65. But before then, Joy spoke to Dr. Thilo Kunith. He's a Parkinson's UK Fellow at Edinburgh University's School of Biological Sciences. He decided to test her, and she was very, very accurate, even spotting it before people had been diagnosed.
She was telling us that this individual had Parkinson's before he knew, before anybody knew. So then I really started to believe her that she could really detect Parkinson's.
And that opens up the possibility of a new test.
You can imagine a small collection of fairly inexpensive tests, and a skin swab for an odour would be very inexpensive.
And that's where Professor Perdita Barron comes in. She works at the School of Chemistry at Manchester University.
So the purpose of this experiment is to see whether Joy can distinguish the Parkinson's smells from the samples that we've taken from patients.
She's looking for the molecules that are unique to Parkinson's, and she thinks she's found them. I went to see her the day she told Joy.
Here we have 10 features, 10 molecules that are distinctive to that population, and so we think that those molecules may well be what Joy is smelling, because this type of analysis was most similar to Joy's smell.
And in the future, this could lead to a simple diagnostic test and could make a real difference to people living with Parkinson's.
That report by Elizabeth Quigley in Scotland. You're listening to Global News, the most important stories and the best interviews and on-the-spot reporting from the BBC World Service. Every weekend you can hear a review of the week's main news stories and why they matter. That's in the world this week, and the programme is also available to download from our website www.bbc.co.uk/programmes. The suffering of civilians in a besieged, rebel-held area near Syria's capital has reached a critical point. That's the warning from the International Red Cross. It says dozens of civilians have been killed or injured in the Damascus suburb of eastern Ghouta in the past month, as fighting there has intensified. There are severe food and fuel shortages, and the cold weather is worsening the hardship. I heard more from Yolanda Jacquemet, a Red Cross spokesperson for the Middle East.
There is this combination of factors that leads to an absolutely harrowing situation. Over the past months, there has been increased fighting, and we have credible reports of scores of civilians injured and killed. Then you have food shortages and the spike in prices, dramatic spike in food prices. And then you have lack of access to healthcare, and finally, winter setting in and the cold. So the conditions for civilians are absolutely terrible.
And how many people are we talking about?
Well, in the whole region of Eastern Ghouta, we speak of about 400,000 people, with a concentration in the city of Douma, 100,000, but yes, 400,000 all over this region.
And who is to blame for this crisis?
Well, you know, as an international humanitarian organizations, we do not look at pointing fingers. We look at the protection of civilians and at their well-being. So we are making this public appeal now, and of course we also discuss bilaterally with all those involved. The point is, again, not to apportion blame. The point is to say that civilians are putting in an acceptable situation, that the levels of suffering are just too high. Let's take an example, the children. The children are weakened now by a lack of nutritious food. For example, the price of bread, which is of course a staple food in Syria, has risen from 50 US cents to $10. A pack of half a kilo of bread now costs $10. A kilo of sugar costs $25. So of course these prices are totally unaffordable for the vast majority of people in the enclave.
But realistically, there's little chance of the situation changing. I mean, if there is no action taken, how bad can it get there?
Well, it is bad enough right now, and of course we are very concerned because with the lack of access for humanitarian convoys, ourselves we've been able to go there last on the 12th of November. And every time we go, we can bring only sufficient quantities of food for a limited number of people and for just a few weeks. So what we need is for humanitarian convoys to be allowed in on a regular and frequent basis. And what we need is for people with chronic conditions, health conditions, and for the wounded to be allowed to access healthcare. And right now, hospitals in the region are not able to take care of patients with, say, cancer or diabetes or kidney failure. Neither are they able to take care of people with severe injuries which are related to the ongoing fighting.
Yolanda Jacquemet of the Red Cross speaking to me from Geneva. A year ago, a truck crashed into a Christmas market in the centre of Berlin, killing 12 people and injuring more than 70. It was the Islamist terror attack German authorities had long feared. Still, when it happened, they turned out to be ill-prepared. On Monday, Chancellor Merkel met survivors and relatives who've criticised her in recent weeks for a lack of support and empathy. And on Tuesday, a memorial service will be held in Breitscheidplatz, the scene of last year's attack. Our Berlin correspondent Jenny Hill has been back there to talk to people.
It's hard to describe. The truck came through here and slammed into a stall over there.
Peter looks down at the sausages he's cooking and quietly recounts what he saw that night.
We came out of our stall to see what had happened. We tried to help, but very soon police arrived and sent us all away. We waited outside the sealed-off area and started to call our families. telling them we had survived.
It's a year since terror stilled the heart of Berlin. But the noise, the festivity, has returned. Children chatter excitedly among the Christmas stalls, oblivious to the concrete blocks that now shield the market from the busy road beyond.
We are here for a long weekend, and we discussed on the train here whether we should come to this market. We told ourselves there are so many good people. Unfortunately, there are also a few who commit terror attacks. But we are optimistic that nothing bad will happen. We're happy to be here, and we are resolved to have a good time.
Nein, gar keine, weil es kann überall was passieren.
I'm not at all worried. This can happen anywhere. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here drinking my Glühwein and eating my sausage. We shouldn't be afraid. By being here, we demonstrate our defiance.
You do look at people with a migrant background differently, that's true. You watch out for groups of people in public places, railway stations and so on. But all in all, I think we're fortunate enough to experience the positive effects of migration.
Last week, in the rain, a solemn visit. Angela Merkel, unannounced, laid a white rose on the ground. She's damaged by this. The man who killed and maimed her entered Germany as an asylum seeker. And now the families of the dead are angry with her. They believe she could and should have done more to help them.
They were
thrown into a situation very suddenly, which wasn't their choice. I got calls dealing with problems like, where is the body? When can I get the body? How do I organise the funeral? Under these circumstances, who pays for it? Questions like that. They got angry when they realised no one was helping them. Quite the opposite. They were issued bills for the death certificate.
Roland Weber is a lawyer officially appointed by the Berlin city authorities to support victims of violent crime. He works for free and tells us that a year on, lessons have been learnt.
Germany was not very well prepared to deal with the consequences of such an attack. In my role, I've worked with victims and relatives for a very long time. I liaise between families and the police. But for me too, the situation was new because so many were affected. 12 dead, at least 70 injured. We had hundreds of people to deal with in Germany and abroad who all needed information very quickly. We didn't have that information. Due to data protection rules, we sometimes didn't even know ourselves in which hospital injured people were, so it was very difficult to contact relatives.
Do you think that the families, is there a sense that they blame Mrs. Merkel politically? In effect, do any of them feel they've paid the price for her refugee policy?
No one said in so many words that the loss of their relatives was a consequence of Merkel's refugee policy. But what I was told is that the relatives are disappointed and angry that the Berlin police didn't have the resources to monitor potential threats and avoid such an attack.
As vats of Glühwein steam in the air, Peter seems to avoid looking at the makeshift memorial, candles, flowers, photographs opposite his stall. A more permanent tribute, a golden crack in the ground, the names of the dead engraved around it, is to be officially unveiled as part of the anniversary commemoration.
After the attack last year, we had to think about whether to come back or not. Then we thought, yes, we will go back. We won't give these people the satisfaction of winning. Closing the market would have sent the wrong signal. So we came back, and we knew we would come back again this year.
Is it hard, I wonder, to be back here again?
I just don't think about it. Maybe that will change when they open the official memorial over there. Maybe then the memories will come back, but I'll try to carry on.
Jenny Hill in Berlin. You're listening to Global News It's one of the world's great languages, but there's growing concern that Arabic, the language of the Quran, may be losing influence. Monday was World Arabic Language Day, but with many intellectuals in the Arabic-speaking world preferring to use English, what more can be done to preserve this beautiful but very complex language? Edgar Jalad is the editor of the BBC's Arabic TV channel. He explained the problems the language faces.
One is Arabic is strictly linked to the Quran, to a religious book that was written 14 centuries ago. And century after century, new elements to our daily life has been introduced, and especially when technology came into the game and started modifying a lot of our lives. And most recently, when we started chatting, for example, in chatting room, it didn't exist in all languages in the beginning when we were in messengers, and it was in English. So everybody used to write in English, or for some people to write Arabic in English letters, which is still the trend now for some people. So all these elements, they have made things more difficult. For example, when the computer was introduced, the computer came on the back of the calculator. So in Arabic, people managed to translate calculator because the word does exist. But when the calculator became a computer, then this was a problem. They still call it calculator in Arabic, which was criticized by many specialists in the language. So they decided to call it computer. And there is no academy, for example, in Arabic, in the Arabic word. If you remember, 2 years ago, if I still remember, the English dictionary introduced a new word, which is selfie, that didn't exist before that. So we don't have that in the Arabic word. There are people who are looking after the language. It's based on personal initiatives in respective countries, but there is no college of people who are meeting on a regular basis, trying to think, what are we going to call this or that?
I suppose what makes that harder is because when you're talking about France, you're talking about one country.
Yes.
When you're talking about Arabic, you're talking about many countries which speak many different forms of the language. So it's much harder to have a kind of word that everyone agrees on.
Definitely. This adds to the complications because the Arab word is made of so many countries with different cultures. And many people, they don't feel comfortable speaking classical Arabic. That's why someone from Algeria could find difficulties in understanding someone from Lebanon or from Palestine.
Now, it's World Arabic Day, which is designed to highlight awareness of the language. But what more do you think can be done to protect and preserve Arabic, given all those issues?
Arabic is not an easy language. But still, some people are very categoric in learning Arabic and saying that there is counter-revolution, if you say, that they want to stick to Arabic. And that's the idea of this day of protecting the Arabic word, that we need to stick, even in our WhatsApp messages, we need to use Arabic. So, it's a debate in the Arab word that will never end.
Edgar Jalad of BBC Arabic. There's been an outpouring of grief on social media after the sudden death of a popular South Korean singer, Kim Jong-hyun. Police are looking into the possibility that the performer, a member of the boy band SHINee, took his own life. Michael Bristow reports.
모두 할 말을 잃지 like you 4차원 이상의 기적의 view.
Korean pop or K-pop isn't just listened to in South Korea. It's a phenomenon across East Asia, and SHINee are one of the top bands. They were looking to make it big in the West, but fans are now mourning the death of the lead singer Kim Jong-hyun, who was in his late 20s. He was found at a rented apartment in Seoul. His sister raised the alarm after receiving a series of distressing messages. One read simply, "Let me go." The singer was rushed to hospital suffering from carbon monoxide poisoning. Coal briquettes were found burning on a frying pan in the flat. Doctors tried to resuscitate the star, but he never regained consciousness. Police think Jong-hyun could have taken his own life. SHINee, made up of 5 members, was formed in 2008 and had a string of hits. As well as being a singer and an accomplished dancer, Jong-hyun played a large part in the group's songwriting and production. In 2015, he launched a successful solo career. If he did end his own life, grieving fans will want to know why.
Michael Bristow reporting. And that's all from us for now, but an updated version of the Global News podcast will be available for you to download later. If you want to comment on this podcast or the topics covered in it, you can send us an email. The address is globalpodcast@bbc.co.uk. I'm Janat Jalil. Until next time, goodbye.
Our brand new podcast series, The Assassination, is about an unsolved murder with global ramifications. It's an investigation into the assassination of one of the world's most prominent politicians, Pakistan's Benazir Bhutto. Subscribe now and you won't miss episode 1. Search for The Assassination where you get your podcasts.
Kêu gọi Triều Tiên đình chỉ kéo dài việc thử nghiệm